Hello and welcome back to this Downful Idealistic Crusade. This video will be a short update detailing the few additions I've made to my Hardy Boys collection. I'm just chipping away at a few volumes, and as always, I try to wait until I have at least a few books to go over. That way I'm not doing a video every time I find random assorted volumes. So these first three will be for my original canon books, and I finally was able to complete my original text collection with these two volumes. They're not in the best shape, so these are much more reading copies to have as a placeholder until I can find nicer condition copies. So the first one, of course, is the one original text volume I was missing, which is Book 14, The Hidden Harbor Mystery. This, of course, is a later Tweed copy, and, of course, is missing its dust jacket, and as you can tell from the spine, is not in the greatest of shape. But it was perfectly fine for reading purposes, and the interior is okay. It has the orange Greta end papers, but, of course, because the dust jacket is missing, it is rather difficult to try and tell when this was printed. But seeing as this book is legitimately one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult, to get the original text for, because it was one of the first to be revised, and so original text copies dry up very quickly. And of course, that means they're much more valuable and expensive. So, trying to find one of these with a dust jacket, or even it didn't even make it to the picture cover with the original text. So, it is much pricier and much more scarce trying to find the original text of this particular volume. Let's get the text block there. So my guess is this is some type of a 1950s copy, but again, it is hard to date it without the list of book titles that would be on the dust jacket flap and the other indicators. So again, not the best of shape, but a nice enough reading copy for the time being. I was able to finally read the original text of the Hidden Harbor Mystery this way. Next up is the original text for the Detective Handbook, and I'm sure most people are not as aware that even the separate Detective Handbook volume did receive its text updating for rather interesting purposes for many things. So, of course, let me show you the spine. It is slightly larger in terms of dimensions, and they did alter the traditional logo a bit. So it says authentic detective methods for solving mysteries instead of the Hardy Boys on the side. So if you are going for completion, even though it's not technically one of the canon books, it is still part of the canon, and this is a different text than the 1970s updated edition, which is what you'll find much more commonly. As you can tell, even the text block was designed for the traditional size, so why they felt the need to give this the more premium large size, I guess, was to make it stand out more and to perhaps charge more. But it does have the special detective methods included. So basically, this was literally trying to be a detective handbook for kids, and it has tons of illustrations. The actual book is broken up into chapters and different sections on detecting, so it is very much the same as what turned up in the 1970s reprinting of the revised text. So the text itself is somewhat similar, and a lot of the actual images you'll see did make it over, but some did not, because it was, again, severely revised, just like the rest of the canon books. Copies of this original version are becoming more and more scarce, and it seems they didn't print it in as many quantities as, say, a normal canon volume. So most of the time, if you do find the Detective Handbook, it's almost always going to be the revised text with a version of the 70s art when it was made, or I should say 60s and 70s art printings. So it is rather tough finding this original version. It's not the most different of the revised text, but again, if you're going for completion and you're collecting the original text, you've got to go ahead and get a copy of this original version of the Detective Handbook in the larger hardcover size. In terms of condition, this is pretty good. It's not perfect, but again, for the price that I paid, which wasn't very much, I was just very happy to finally get a copy of this, because I remember I read this at some point in this version when I was a kid, I think from a library, but I didn't realize realized then that this too had also gone through text revisions. So lastly, for original text, this volume I found for so cheap, and it's such an interesting, if admittedly gimmicky method of printing the books, but it's something that I always enjoyed looking at growing up. And of course, I'm talking about the Flashlight edition back-to-back reprinting of the revised text of Volume 1 and 2. Gruston Dunlap would do this for both the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew in this edition series. So this is a 1998 printing that, as you can see, literally replicates what you get on the standard Flashlight editions. However, as it does say back-to-back, what they did, instead of just printing the two volumes together, they actually did combine them into a single volume. So you have the custom spine that literally replicates the two books as if they were, stacked on top of each other. But the back shows you House on the Cliff, and you see you have to actually rotate it around. So this is book 2, and then book 1 you flip around. This is really quite bizarre that they did this. It's one of the, I don't know of another occurrence of this really happening. So when you open it, you get what you would get in the standard Flashlight edition of the Tower Treasure, but when you read it and you get to the end, you get some blank pages, and if you're reading along not paying attention, you'd be like, oh, now I can read House on the Cliff. You would be confronted with the last page of House on the Cliff upside down, because of course you do have to flip the book over. So when you go to open the actual book, it's again upside down from the standard orientation. The first thing you see, though, is the mail order form that would always be tucked in the back of the books for the Hardy Boys and for Nancy Drew. And then you go into the actual first pages of House on the Cliff. And this is what it would look like in the standard Flashlight edition at the time. There's the copyright information. And then the actual text of the book. So it's just slightly changed the formatting, and again done this very bizarre thing where the second book is printed in its entirety upside down in terms of the book layout and design. And then, you would go through and read from this way until you run smack into those blank pages. And you get back to the Tower Treasure upside down, backwards. So it's such a cute thing. There's no reason why they needed to do this. It's really just a gimmick to, sell it to parents buying books for kids, or sell it to kids thinking, oh, that's interesting. And there is a slight discount because these were sold for $7.99, so slightly cheaper than buying the two books individually back in the 90s. So I've never owned this particular edition before. I always thought it was, rather cool, and, admittedly, it's just a cute gag. Again, they did do it for Nancy Drew as well, so there's the matching Nancy Drew version in yellow of the first two books in this type. But you used to see this all the time. It's now you don't, at least I don't see it pop up in used bookstores the way I used to see it all the time. And when it does pop up, it usually has a higher price tag on it now, simply for the novelty of the two volumes printed together. So when I found this for $1.50, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead, because I know I'm not going to find a good copy like this again for this cheap. And I've always loved the just weird, goofy gag of having the two books pasted together, but with the second one upside down and backwards. And you get the custom cover art as well. Next are 3 volumes that I picked up for my digest collection. This first one is, of course, the first of the digest, Night of the Werewolf, volume 59. But this is the later cover art that was updated to match with what's commonly referred to as the checkerboard type design. So I have the original Wanderer edition with the initial cover art and that standard design for the first handful of digests under the Wanderer imprint. But I would like to eventually have all the different cover art variations for the original canon books and for the digests. And I don't think most people are as aware that the digest did go through a number of cover art variations for the for a good portion of the series, at least for the first books. So all the Wanderer books were reprinted in later cover art, some with 2. I should say most with 2, some with 3, some with even more than 3. So just like the canon books, there are some volumes that have multiple cover art designs. And then, of course, they would also lose their internal illustrations eventually. So this printing, it's in rather nice shape, and anytime I stumble across a good condition digest for cheap, and it's not a version I have, especially since they're just really drying up on the used market, you don't come across good shape digest practically ever. So this was a no-brainer, and it was an edition I didn't have. Is updating it to the checkerboard design. And also, most of the art in this iteration of the digest, while it's not as atmospheric a lot of times, they are going for a more realistic style. And the actual painting of the art on this is pretty good. And I like the rendering. And we do have the werewolf shadow there. So it's a nice image. And of course, it's on the colored background. It's all the checkerboard era digests are. Of course, there is some browning on the pages, as is common for a lot of these. This is already on the Minstrel imprint, and this printing is from 1987, so definitely a good bit down the road from the original printing. But what's great about this is it does retain the internal illustrations. So some volumes retain them longer than others, and as you can see here, some of the illustrations in this era of the digest are really well done. And the binding's still rather tight. As you can see, there is some sort of wrinkling on the interior of the pages. And again, the binding is super tight, but still very readable and a nice copy to have that does maintain the internal illustrations. Next, we jump to volume 130, which has the great title of Sidetrack to Danger, again in the checkerboard era of the series. The spine there that matches wonderfully with the rest of the titles in this era. In the back, again on the Minstrel imprint. An ad for Nancy Drew there, and again, definitely a bit newer, so much less of the browning that is common for a lot of these. And definitely much later, as this volume was copyrighted for a publishing date of 1995. Rather thin pages on here, but again, the binding is so tight, they are definitely prone to a little bit of internal wrinkling there. I've seen this on some digests, and then others don't have this issue, but it's just one of the things you'll have to deal with when you're reading these. But it's much better to have the binding tight on these and not really damaged, as opposed to being very well read and basically falling apart at the seams, as you find on some digests. So this is volume 150, The Crisscross Crime, again with the updated 90s art for the digest. That would be the next to last design for them. There's the yellow spine that this series carried. It's got a little bit of fading on it, or it was printed very lightly. I have seen some variation in the yellow spine digest. If I can get it closer so you can see better. So, of course, the title is a different color to match the volume number. But again, I've seen variation in the strength of the yellow on the spine. So even though they're the same, they will have some variation if you have them all on the shelf. It's not going to be one uniform yellow across the shelf. There's the rear. Again, sticking with the Minstrel imprint. So, of course, the book was made and printed in 1998. But internally, it remains the exact same as what you see in 130 that I just showed. And then lastly, for this video, I found a copy of Volume 13 of the current Hardy Boys Adventures series. This is the hardcover version of Volume 13, Bound for Danger. And I had actually forgotten that they did more hardcovers for this series. Almost always you see the paperback editions. So I'd never originally intended to go this far and collect all the various iterations, but I started stumbling across some for inexpensive prices, and I figured I might as well go ahead and start getting these. That way I didn't regret it a couple years later when, as with all the other series that have existed in the modern era, they usually last for a couple years, and then they stop them at some point, and then the volumes dry up and they don't reprint them, and then you're like, why didn't I get these when they were more plentiful? So again, this is exactly the same as what you'll find on the paperback, but it's in this nice slim hardcover volume that is just a little bit bigger than a paperback version in this series. So it'll fit on your shelf nicely. It's under the Aladdin imprint, as all the later Hardy Boys series are. The cover itself, the design, I've gone over in the paperback versions I have, but it's a little on the generic side. It does retain some version of the classic blue from the picture covers, but I also just have never gotten into this series very much, and you have the alternating first person between Frank and Joe as well, which has never really sat well with me. But at least you do have a nice hardcover printing. The actual book itself, once you take the jacket off, you get this nice silver matching spine with the volume number and everything, but it's rather generic. It's just very simple. And then the interior is exactly the same as what you would see in one of the paperback volumes. So again, this is volume 13, which was printed in 2016. Of course, there's no printed plugs in the back or advertisements. The only one is here on the back flap. So that's it for this particular video. Again, I'm just doing this to keep updated for my overall collection, and then that way I'm complete in video form as well to my current status. So I'm still inching closer to trying to reach my overall goal, which is, of course, to have every volume with every cover art in both original and revised text. So I've now completed all the original text for the canon, but hopefully I can get an upgrade copy for Hidden Harbor Mystery at some point to replace that standard reading copy. But until next time, continue to support your local bookshops and help keep the Hardy Boys fan community alive, and enjoy coming back to these as I do frequently. And thanks for watching.